In the heat of a summer's day, a brutal double murder occurred in the heart of Fall River, Massachusetts. A housewife and her father were found hacked to death. But the most chilling part of this case wasn't the crime. It was who was accused of committing it. It was August 4th, 1892, when the quiet town of Fall River was shaken by a horrific discovery. In the Borden family home, Andrew Borden, a wealthy but stern businessman, and his wife Abby Borden were found slaughtered. The weapon, an axe, was believed to be the one used in the crime. But the most unsettling part of this story was not the gruesome deaths, but the woman who was accused of their murder, Lizzie Borden, Andrew's 32-year-old unmarried daughter. Lizzie had always been a mystery to the people around her. She lived with her father and stepmother in a home that had an air of tension surrounding it. Andrew Borden, a man who had inherited a fortune, was not known for being warm or affectionate. In fact, his strict and frugal nature had created an uncomfortable home for Lizzie and her stepmother, Abby. Lizzie was often described as a quiet and reserved woman, but beneath her calm demeanor, the tension in the household was becoming too much to ignore. The relationship between Lizzie and her stepmother was far from perfect. Many people in the community knew that Lizzie had never been close to Abby, and rumors of arguments between the two had been circulating for some time. On the morning of August 4th, Lizzie's life would change forever. The previous evening, Andrew Borden had returned home late from his daily routine, and everything seemed normal. Lizzie and her stepmother had breakfast as usual. But later that morning, just before noon, the house was filled with an eerie silence. The Borden family maid, Bridget Sullivan, had gone outside to rest after being ordered to clean the windows. When she returned to the house, it was the sight that would forever be burned into her memory. She found the bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden in the most horrifying state. Andrew was found slumped on a couch in the living room, his head hacked nearly beyond recognition. Abby was discovered upstairs in a guest room, also hacked to death. Both victims were covered in blood. The scene was gruesome, but what made the crime even more chilling was the fact that Lizzie Borden was the one who discovered the bodies. The police were quickly called to the house. They arrived within minutes and began questioning Lizzie. What struck them as odd was the way Lizzie was acting. She appeared calm, too calm for someone whose parents had just been murdered in such a brutal way. The first piece of evidence that raised suspicion about Lizzie's involvement came from the fact that she had no clear explanation for her whereabouts during the time of the murders. Lizzie claimed she had been in the barn when the killings occurred, but the story seemed inconsistent. She was asked to explain how she could have heard nothing, despite the brutal nature of the crime happening just inside the house. She said she had been resting for much of the morning, but there was no real way to corroborate her story. The police quickly began to suspect her. They searched the house, looking for any clues that could point to the identity of the murderer. But there was something even stranger: Lizzie's behavior. Despite the horror that had just taken place, Lizzie's demeanor seemed oddly unaffected. She didn't show much emotion. Some witnesses reported seeing her act strangely calm, even in the face of such an unimaginable tragedy. While the police were trying to make sense of the crime scene, Lizzie was reported to have been busy changing her clothes, an act that only added to the growing suspicion around her. It didn't help that Lizzie's alibi was weak, and there were numerous contradictions in her story. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Lizzie was becoming the primary suspect in the case. The public's reaction to Lizzie's behavior was mixed, but it was undeniable that suspicion was quickly growing around her. The more the investigation dug into Lizzie's life, the more oddities came to light. Her behavior seemed to be the center of the case. Was she guilty of murder, or was she the victim of a community ready to cast blame? It was a question that would haunt the people of Fall River and the rest of the world for years to come. On August 8th, just 4 days after the murders, Lizzie Borden was arrested and charged with the murders of her father and stepmother. The case would go to trial, and what followed would be a courtroom drama that captured the attention of the nation. But one thing was certain: Lizzie Borden's name would forever be associated with one of the most chilling and controversial murder cases in American history. And even today, people still debate whether Lizzie Borden was truly guilty of the crime or if she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. This was only the beginning of a case that would keep the world guessing for decades, with no clear answers ever emerging. What really happened in that house on August 4th, 1892? Was Lizzie Borden guilty, or was she wrongfully accused? This is the chilling mystery that continues to haunt the Borden family story. The investigation into the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden quickly took a strange turn. Lizzie Borden, already the prime suspect, was under intense scrutiny. Yet the more the authorities questioned her, the more confusing her story became. When the police arrived at the scene, they found Lizzie in an unusual state of calm. Most people would expect someone in her position to be crying, panicked, or even hysterical. But Lizzie didn't seem shaken at all. She was reported to have been oddly composed, almost too composed for someone who had just lost both her father and stepmother in such a shocking way. She was asked about her whereabouts, but her story didn't add up. Lizzie claimed she had been in the barn doing a small chore when the incident occurred, yet no one could verify her story. It raised a key question: how could someone be so detached in the face of such a tragedy? The inconsistencies in Lizzie's story weren't just limited to where she was. She had also made some strange comments that left the police puzzled. She claimed to have heard nothing from inside the house. No sounds of struggle or noise that might come from such a violent act. How could that be? The police couldn't ignore the fact that Lizzie's behavior was anything but typical. Her demeanor, the lack of urgency, and the contradictions in her account made the investigators begin to wonder if she knew more than she was letting on. It wasn't long before the investigators started digging into Lizzie's life and family dynamics. Andrew Borden, though wealthy, was known for his miserly ways. Lizzie's relationship with her father was distant, and she resented his tight control over the family's wealth. Abby Borden, her stepmother, was also a source of tension. Lizzie had never felt close to Abby, and their relationship had become increasingly strained over the years. Neighbors and friends of the family began to reveal details about the Borden household that painted a picture of a home full of hidden frustrations. One of the most telling pieces of information came from Lizzie's maid, Bridget Sullivan. Bridget reported that on the day of the incident, Lizzie had asked her to help with chores around the house. Bridget herself had been outside cleaning the windows, and it was then that she was called back into the house to see the horrific scene. But what Bridget mentioned was something that raised even more suspicion. Lizzie had appeared strangely calm and collected in the moments following the discovery. She didn't act like someone who had just found her parents in such a tragic state. Instead of expressing horror or disbelief, Lizzie had calmly sent Bridget to fetch someone to help. It was this level of calmness that left the police wondering if Lizzie was truly innocent or if she was hiding something. As the investigation unfolded, more strange details began to surface. Lizzie's behavior didn't fit the image of an innocent woman in mourning. She was calm when one might expect distress, and the details of her alibi didn't seem to add up. Lizzie's inconsistent story, her strange actions, and the tension in the Borden household made it clear to the police that they had a complicated case on their hands. By now, the public had already started to form their own opinions about Lizzie. The newspapers, which often sensationalized stories, quickly latched on to the mystery. The case was filled with strange and unsettling details. Lizzie's lack of emotion, the contradictions in her story, and the dysfunctional family dynamic. The investigation into the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden wasn't just about finding the truth. It was also about trying to piece together the mystery of Lizzie Borden herself. The authorities continued to search the Borden house for clues, hoping to uncover something that could shed light on what happened that day. They found nothing that could definitively point to the killer, but Lizzie's odd behavior remained a central part of their investigation. Was she the killer? or was she simply caught in a tragedy that no one could fully understand? As the days passed, the case became a tangled web of suspicion, uncertainty, and questions that no one had the answers to. The investigation into Lizzie Borden had only just begun, and it was clear that the mystery would only deepen as more facts came to light. The truth behind the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden seemed to grow further out of reach, and Lizzie Borden's place in the case remained a dark enigma. As the investigation into the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden continued, the case quickly became more complex and mysterious. Lizzie Borden, still the primary suspect, was placed under intense scrutiny, but there was no concrete evidence to support the claims against her. Instead, the investigators found themselves facing a bizarre mix of odd behavior, strange inconsistencies, and a growing sense of uncertainty. Despite the overwhelming attention on Lizzie, there was still no direct evidence connecting her to the crime. The police were beginning to focus more on the circumstances surrounding the murders. The fact that both Andrew and Abby had been found in separate rooms with such brutal force raised many questions. It seemed impossible for someone like Lizzie, a woman with no prior history of violence, to have carried out the crime with such intensity. Yet, her odd behavior, lack of emotional response, and shifting stories left the investigators with no clear answers. One of the key turning points came when the police began to investigate the Borden family's financial situation. Andrew Borden, while wealthy, had a reputation for being tight-fisted. His strict control over the family's finances, combined with his refusal to share his wealth, had created tension in the home. Lizzie, it seemed, had been unhappy with her father's ways for a long time. She had reportedly expressed resentment over her father's refusal to give her money or allow her to live independently. Many of the neighbors recalled Lizzie's complaints about Andrew's frugal habits, and it became clear that Lizzie's relationship with her father had been strained for years. As for Abby, Lizzie had never felt close to her stepmother. In fact, their relationship was described as tense and uncomfortable. Abby was often portrayed as a woman who tried to maintain order in the house, but her relationship with Lizzie seemed distant, and there were even reports of arguments between the two. Lizzie had always made it clear that she didn't like her stepmother, and many wondered if this resentment could have played a role in the tragic events that unfolded that day. But even with the growing sense of motive, the police were struggling to find a clear connection between Lizzie and the crime. Lizzie's behavior, though strange, was not enough to prove her guilt. There was no evidence that directly linked her to the deaths of her father and stepmother. The investigators had no weapon, no fingerprints, and no witnesses. Lizzie's lack of a solid alibi made her the prime suspect, but without evidence, they couldn't move forward with the case. In the meantime, the public's fascination with the case only grew. Lizzie Borden's name became a household one, and the sensationalized media coverage painted her as a mysterious and potentially dangerous woman. The court of public opinion was divided. Some saw Lizzie as the victim of a family tragedy, while others were convinced that she was guilty. The media portrayed Lizzie as either a cold, calculating killer or a misunderstood woman wrongly accused of a crime she didn't commit. The police, feeling the pressure to make an arrest, began to focus even more closely on Lizzie's behavior. They questioned her again and again, trying to catch her in a lie or make her slip up. But Lizzie's story remained consistent in a way that was both suspicious and puzzling. She continued to insist that she had no part in the deaths of her parents and that she was innocent. But the more she spoke, the more the police began to wonder if she was hiding something. Despite the lack of evidence, the police were convinced that Lizzie had something to do with the deaths. They just couldn't figure out what. The case began to take on an air of uncertainty. As the days went by, it became clear that Lizzie's story was full of contradictions, and the authorities were unsure whether they would ever uncover the truth. Lizzie's trial, which would eventually come in 1893, would be a spectacle that captured the attention of the entire nation. But for now, the investigation continued, and the mystery of what happened inside the Borden house remained unsolved. What really happened that summer day in 1892? Was Lizzie Borden guilty, or was she the victim of a broken system and a family gone wrong? The authorities were left with more questions than answers, and the story of Lizzie Borden had only just begun to unfold. As the investigation continued, it seemed that the more they tried to piece together the truth, the more elusive it became. Lizzie Borden's role in the tragedy remained a puzzle, and as time passed, the case grew only more bizarre and mysterious. The trial of Lizzie Borden began in June 1893, and it was nothing short of a spectacle. The case had already captivated the nation, and now the courtroom drama was about to take center stage. Lizzie, charged with the deaths of her father and stepmother, stood trial for a crime that no one could seem to understand. The public's fascination with the case reached a fever pitch, and the entire country was watching as the details of the investigation and Lizzie's strange behavior came to light. Lizzie's defense team was quick to argue that there was no concrete evidence linking her to the crime. The lack of a weapon, the absence of fingerprints, and the lack of any physical evidence left the prosecution with little to go on. The defense argued that Lizzie was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that the case against her was based on circumstantial evidence and public opinion rather than solid facts. Lizzie's defense team emphasized her calm demeanor after the incident, suggesting that it was simply a result of her shock and grief rather than any guilt. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted Lizzie as a woman with a clear motive, resentment toward her father and stepmother. The prosecution suggested that Lizzie's dissatisfaction with her family's financial situation and her strained relationship with Abby had pushed her to commit the crime. They argued that Lizzie had a history of conflict with her father, who was known for being a strict and frugal man. Lizzie's refusal to accept his control over her life, combined with her tense relationship with Abby, created a perfect storm for a violent outburst. The prosecution also pointed out the inconsistencies in Lizzie's testimony, arguing that her shifting story and lack of emotion after the deaths were clear signs of guilt. As the trial progressed, the focus shifted from the physical evidence, or lack thereof, to Lizzie's character. The media had already painted her as a mysterious figure, and the trial only added to the public's perception of her. Some saw her as a victim of circumstance, a woman trapped in a dysfunctional family. Others saw her as a cold and calculating killer who had finally snapped under the pressure of her family's control. One of the most significant moments in the trial came when Lizzie took the stand. It was a rare occurrence for a woman to testify in her own defense at that time, and Lizzie's decision to speak for herself was met with both curiosity and skepticism. Her testimony was calm and collected, and she denied any involvement in the deaths of her parents. Lizzie insisted that she had not killed her father and stepmother, and that she had no idea who could have committed such a crime. She spoke of her shock and horror when she discovered the bodies, but her composed demeanor left many in the courtroom questioning whether she was telling the truth or simply trying to hide her guilt. In the end, the trial didn't result in the dramatic showdown that many had expected. The jury deliberated for just over an hour before returning with a verdict of not guilty. Lizzie Borden was acquitted of all charges, and the case, though unresolved, was closed. The public's reaction was mixed. Some believed Lizzie's acquittal was a triumph of justice, while others were convinced that she had gotten away with murder. The verdict, however, did little to quell the suspicions surrounding Lizzie. In the years that followed, she would continue to be a subject of fascination, with many continuing to debate whether or not she was guilty. After the trial, Lizzie's life took a strange turn. Though she was acquitted, she was never able to escape the shadow of the crime. The media continued to follow her every move, and the town of Fall River never fully accepted her innocence. Lizzie's once quiet life was now filled with suspicion and whispers. She lived for many years in a house she bought with her inheritance, but the stigma of the case followed her until her death in 1927. Though the case was closed, the mystery of what happened that day in 1892 continued to linger in the minds of many. Did Lizzie Borden kill her father and stepmother, or was she simply the victim of a broken system and a family torn apart by tension? The truth may never be fully known, but Lizzie Borden's name would forever be linked to one of the most chilling and controversial cases in American history. Even today, the case remains an open topic of discussion, with people still questioning Lizzie's involvement. New theories emerge every year, and the case continues to capture the imagination of those who are drawn to its mystery. Lizzie Borden's story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the truth is more elusive than we can imagine. The tragedy that occurred in Fall River in 1892 may never have a definitive answer, but it will forever remain one of the most captivating and unsolved mysteries of American history. Years passed, and the case of Lizzie Borden faded from the headlines, but the mystery surrounding her actions never truly disappeared. Despite her acquittal, the shadow of suspicion remained over Lizzie for the rest of her life. People continued to speculate about what had really happened on that summer day in 1892, and many still believed she had somehow been involved in the deaths of her father and stepmother. For Lizzie, life after the trial was anything but peaceful. Though she had been found not guilty, the public never fully accepted her innocence. She was forever tainted by the allegations and her place in the court of public opinion. In Fall River, the town where the horrific events had unfolded, Lizzie became an outcast, avoided by some, and treated with a mix of curiosity and fear by others. People who had once known her now whispered behind her back, unsure whether she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice or a cold-hearted criminal who had escaped punishment. Lizzie moved to a new home after the trial, purchasing a grand house in the more fashionable part of town. She had money from the inheritance left to her by her father. But despite the wealth and a new beginning, her life was marked by a strange solitude. Her social life was minimal, and she became something of a recluse. Her reputation as a suspected murderer followed her wherever she went. The once promising future that Lizzie had seemed to have ahead of her had now turned into a life of isolation. During the years following the trial, Lizzie lived quietly, but her name continued to be associated with one of the most bizarre and unsettling criminal cases in American history. She never truly escaped the rumors, and some even speculated that the truth behind the crime would one day be uncovered. Lizzie had lived through the trial, the media frenzy, and the public's divided opinion, but she could never escape the dark legacy of the events in Fall River. The mystery of Lizzie Borden's life and the tragedy that had unfolded in her family's home remained unsolved for many years. Was Lizzie truly innocent, as the jury had declared? Or had she, for reasons no one would ever fully understand, carried out the crime and gotten away with it? Despite the passage of time, the case remained a haunting enigma, with no answers that could satisfy everyone's questions. As Lizzie aged, her health began to decline, and her once quiet life became more difficult. She lived in the home she had bought after the trial, a large, imposing house that was, in some ways, a symbol of her continued separation from the world. In 1927, Lizzie Borden passed away at the age of 66. Though her death was peaceful, it did little to bring closure to the mystery that had followed her for most of her life. Lizzie was buried beside her parents, the very people she had been accused of harming in the family plot in Fall River. Though the case was officially closed, the questions about Lizzie's involvement in the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden continued to linger. The legacy of the Borden case didn't end with Lizzie's death. In the years after her passing, interest in the case grew, with books, movies, and documentaries dedicated to exploring every detail of the mystery. Lizzie's story would not be forgotten. People continued to debate her guilt or innocence, with some insisting that she had indeed killed her parents, while others believed she was the victim of a miscarriage of justice. New theories, documentaries, and investigations surfaced over the years, but no one has ever been able to definitively prove what happened on that fateful day in 1892. Some believe Lizzie was innocent, a woman wrongly accused and forever marked by a tragic event, while others continue to hold onto the belief that she was guilty of the crime, getting away with it due to the lack of solid evidence. The case of Lizzie Borden, more than a century after the fact, remains one of the most famous and controversial mysteries in American history. Whether Lizzie was a victim of circumstance or a cold-blooded criminal, her story continues to captivate people's imaginations. The true story of what happened that summer day may never be fully understood, but Lizzie Borden's name will forever be associated with one of the darkest and most puzzling chapters in American true crime history. The case of Lizzie Borden serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the truth can remain hidden, even in the face of overwhelming public interest. It's a story that continues to intrigue, haunt, and captivate the minds of those who seek to uncover the truth behind the mystery of Lizzie Borden. Though Lizzie's life has ended, the questions surrounding her actions still linger in the minds of those who study the case and continue to wonder, did Lizzie Borden truly commit the crime, or was she simply the victim of a world too eager to condemn her? Though Lizzie Borden was acquitted of the deaths of her father and stepmother, the mystery surrounding the case never fully disappeared. People continued to question whether Lizzie was truly innocent or if she had gotten away with the crime. Despite the acquittal, Lizzie's life was forever marked by suspicion and public curiosity. The lack of solid evidence was a key factor in her being found not guilty. There were no fingerprints, no weapon, and no witnesses to directly connect Lizzie to the crime. The prosecution tried to argue that Lizzie had a motive based on her strained relationships with both her father, Andrew, and her stepmother, Abby, but there was no clear explanation for how these tensions could lead to such a violent act. Some believed Lizzie's resentment over her father's strict control of the family finances was the trigger, while others speculated that her dislike of Abby might have fueled her anger. Lizzie's strange behavior after the incident, however, made her a subject of intense public scrutiny. She remained calm when most people would expect distress, and her inconsistent stories added to the doubt surrounding her. Despite the lack of evidence, the public's fascination with her grew, and her name became synonymous with mystery. After the trial, Lizzie lived in relative seclusion, though she could never escape the shadow of suspicion. Despite inheriting wealth, she struggled to escape the stigma of the case. As she grew older, Lizzie remained an enigmatic figure, and even after her death in 1927, questions about her role in the deaths of her parents remained unanswered. Her story would live on in books, documentaries, and endless speculation, keeping the mystery of Lizzie Borden alive for generations. To this day, people continue to debate whether Lizzie was guilty or innocent. Her case serves as a haunting reminder of how the truth can sometimes be elusive, leaving behind a legacy of doubt and intrigue.